How does one begin to consider the Earth's atmosphere? Impossibly vast, its volume at sea level is 2.7 billion cubic miles, but at the same time inconceivably thin. 3/4 of its mass is with 12 miles of our planet's surface. Weather Report brings together the work of 21 artists and 3 researchers to explore the way that our immersion in the atmosphere, what can only be considered the most remarkable feature of our planet, has influenced visual culture in the 21st century. Weather Report is being presented at a time when there's a heightened awareness of weather phenomena due to both the increasing frequency of severe weather and the growing evidence of climate change. But independent of the catastrophic, weather is something that affects us all subtly on a daily basis. And although environmental concerns are explored by a number of artists in the exhibition, many of the works included reference the weather in unusual and unexpected ways. This is one section of a 100-foot-long painting by the artist Ellen Harvey. The painting is entitled The Mermaid, Two Incompatible Systems Intimately Linked. And Ellen was invited about 4 years ago to propose a work to be permanently installed in the Miami Beach Convention Center, which is, as some of you know, the location of Art Basel, Miami. And she went down to Miami to investigate the site and quickly realized that Miami was one of the places in the United States where people are very, very aware of climate change and sea level rise. The streets of Miami Beach flood when there are high tides. You don't even need a storm. And Miami's been installing pumping stations to pump out sections of the city. The way Ellen responded was essentially working from satellite photographs of southern Florida to do a 100-mile wide swath of land from Miami Beach to the Gulf of Mexico. This is the far right-hand section of the painting, and right here in the painting actually is the Miami Beach Convention Center, which is the home of another version of this. She painted it, and it was subsequently transferred onto glass panels for permanent installation at the convention center. There's actually another section of it here, which is the western suburbs of Miami, and upstairs we'll see the remainder of the painting. So this is the left-hand section, the western section of the painting. What we saw downstairs was Miami Beach. This is from the western Miami suburbs across the Everglades, which is in the middle of the painting there, all the way to Cape Sable, which is in southwestern Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. And Ellen's thought about this is that actually it's recording what is can be considered really the most fragile landscape in the United States, which will change in our lifetimes. So it's kind of a memorial to this landscape. And you can see it's incredibly detailed. It took her 3 years to paint this, including, every little building and field located. And the title of it, The Mermaid, obviously refers to a creature that lives both in the land and the sea, and two incompatible systems. The idea that the head of the mermaid is Miami Beach and the tail out this way is actually the Everglades. These are 2 photographs by the artist Keever. Kim started out as a researcher, actually working for NASA, studying the flow, high velocity flow of air around aircraft and through jet engines. And he turned his career back on a career in the defense industry to actually become an artist, moving to New York about 30 years ago now. He's developed this really unique take on landscape painting, and really these are hybrid objects. He considers them paintings as much as photographs. And what Kim does is actually create these cloud-like forms in large aquariums by pouring in pigments of different viscosities. So he has an aquarium in his studio that's about 6 feet across, and he works, like I said, by pouring paint in and creating a situation that's akin or analogous to convection in the atmosphere. Convection is where air of different weights and humidities either rise or fall. And by pouring these pigments into water, he creates an analogous situation, creating these cloud-like forms which are, in many cases, otherworldly. This is a work by the Swedish artists who have worked together for almost 25 years, Mats Biggert and Lars Bergstrom. And it's from a series called Inside the Weather, a Synaptic Battlefield. They became interested in the fact that weather forecasting evolved with the military need to know about weather patterns, and the army that was best prepared for the weather was one that had an advantage. And the series depicts, using symbols from weather maps, different points in history where weather actually changed the course of history. This one's called the Russian Campaign, 1812, and in 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia and made it almost to Moscow, but in November of 1812 was turned back, not by the Russian army, but by the severe Russian winter. So Biggert and Bergstrom here have depicted these two armies as two cold fronts confronting one another. The linear form are the symbols for cold fronts, and at the bottom of each form is the meteorological symbol for snow, these snowflakes, which they think of as being snow, but also referencing fallen soldiers. This was a very important work for me to include in the exhibition. It actually is the oldest work in the show. It goes back to 1973. It's a work by the American artist Nancy Graves. In the 1960s, it was really the growth of the modern environmental movement, the 60s and early 70s, but also was a time when weather forecasting became much more sophisticated because of satellite photography and computers. And this work by Nancy Graves is entitled First Look at the World's Weather. And as far as I know, it's the first time an artist has depicted weather over the entire planet. And Nancy made this piece from composite photographs from the Tyros weather satellite. And if you look at it, even though it's kind of broken up and pixelated, you can see that actually is North America there, South America. And up to this point, if you're an artist and you wanted to depict the weather, you would go outside and look up at the sky. But here in the 1960s and 70s, suddenly the world was given new tools in terms of satellites and computers, and suddenly an artist could depict global weather. These are a series of works by the artist Jitish Khaled, who lives in Bombay, India. And these works are part of a series called Rain Studies. And at first they look like astronomical charts, but what Khaled does is make a circular mask using a piece of cardboard, putting it on top of a watercolor paper, and bringing the watercolor paper out horizontally when it starts to rain. And the raindrops fall on the paper where there was no mask. He brings it back in and sprays a silicone pigment on it, which resists water. So the pigment goes everywhere water didn't go. And then also these sections where he draws a grid with an aquarelle pencil, a water-based pencil that dissolves. And once again, the rain falls and dissolves the grid. He quite often connects the raindrops with lines, making them look even more like astronomical charts of the sky. And the most important thing about this is that he really connects this kind of cosmic perspective on the sky to his own personal, to his body, by recording the number of breaths that he takes actually every time he makes a piece. Like this one, it says here, 3 to 4 breath cycles. So he's recorded the date, the 12th of August, 2017, 2:16 p.m., and he breathed 3 to 4 times while the rain was falling on this piece of paper. The other thing is he only does this during the monsoon season in India, which lasts from June into October, further tying it to specific atmospheric conditions, including seasonality. This is a work by Ayumi Ishii entitled The Breath from Which Clouds Are Formed, and it looks like a grid of photographs of clouds, and every other photograph actually, or image in this, is a photograph of a cloud. For instance, that's a photograph of a cloud, and that is a photograph of a cloud. But the images in between are not photographs of clouds. The artist painted paper with thermochromic pigment, which changes color at a certain temperature. In this case, a little bit below body temperature, and it was blue thermochromic pigment. And Ayumi breathed on the paper, her breath, the warmth of her breath, temporarily changed the pigment from blue to clear. So her breath created these cloud-like forms on the paper. And needless to say, as we breathe, we participate in making the atmosphere. We take in oxygen and carbon dioxide, but as we exhale, we put out more carbon dioxide than we've inhaled. We also put out water vapor. So literally, our breath participates in making the atmosphere in many different ways. These are two works by Josh Callaghan. The one on the left is Chicago Snow 6, and the one is on the right is Chicago Snow 7. Part of a series the artist did depicting the kind of snow that he remembers from his childhood in Chicago, particularly at the end of the winter or after a thaw. Josh lives in Southern California now, in Los Angeles, and this work is partially generated by nostalgia for Chicago winters. The one thing that interests me about putting this work in the show is that generally we think of, when we think of depiction of the weather, we think of depicting something that is beautiful or spectacular or transcendent. But in this case, it's really talking about the abject, the kind of sad side of winter in the sky. If you've lived in a northern city after it snows, you realize quite often a couple weeks later that snow plows or snow shovels have pushed up these piles of snow on the sidewalk. They get dirty with sand and other debris and are actually quite unpleasant and ugly. So I love the fact that Josh actually took the time to render very carefully these piles of snow that we would take for granted that you find in an urban area in the winter. This is a work by Hitoshi Nomura entitled Time's Arrow, Oxygen minus 183 degrees centigrade. And Nomura is an important Japanese artist, conceptual artist who came up in the 60s, whose work deals primarily with the rhythms of nature and the patterns found in nature. And in this case, the work consists of a glass dewar flask, a thermos-like flask made out of Pyrex. And every day, a preparator here at the museum fills the flask with liquid oxygen, which boils away over the course of the day. So, oxygen is obviously the gas that makes life on Earth possible, and we are breathing oxygen. In fact, as you're viewing this video, you're breathing oxygen in and out. But it's kind of this abstraction, we never see it. And in this case, the artist has made it powerfully manifest in front of our eyes. The other interesting thing is that liquid oxygen is a pale blue color. It's the only gas that makes up the atmosphere that has any color when it's in liquid form. This is a work by the artist Inigo Mangala-Wavale. Mangala-Wavale's work focuses on the forces that shape both the natural world and society. And about 15 years ago, he became interested in supercell thunderstorm clouds, and taking data provided by the University of Illinois, they had tracked a supercell thunderstorm as it moved across the Midwest from Illinois across Indiana to Ohio. Inigo took this data and actually rendered this storm three-dimensionally. And this is the same storm, a snapshot of the same storm, or two snapshots taken 60 seconds apart in its development. And the reason that Inigo fabricated the storm this way is that obviously clouds are ephemeral objects, and it's how do you depict an ephemeral object, particularly in a sculpture, which is a solid thing. His solution was to actually make the surface reflective. So as the viewer moves around the cloud, the refractions and reflections change, creating an ephemeral experience which approaches the idea of the ephemerality of a cloud. These are a series of drawings, works on paper, done by the artist Pat Pickett. I became aware of Pat Pickett's work quite a while ago when she lived actually on the east end of Long Island. She now lives in Southern California. But these drawings are really part of this series, this extended drawing project, experimental drawing project, where she collaborates with trees. And what Pat does is attach pens to the tips of branches of trees and has the pen touch the surface of a piece of paper that's mounted on an easel, a very sturdy easel, sitting on the ground, and allows the tree in the wind to move and create a drawing, an automatic drawing, not only speaking of the species of the tree, but also the weather conditions. And each of these works actually are titled as the species of the tree and the location. Like for instance, this one is, you can see down here, subalpine fir, 8,200 feet at Saddle Junction above Idlewild. This is done in Southern California. This is a work entitled Tondo by the artist Nick Cave. And Cave created a series of these in 2018. And the pattern, the object is actually made out of wire and glass beads. It's quite a beautiful, beautiful thing when you get up close to it in particular. But the pattern that's depicted on its surface is a combination of Doppler radar image of a hurricane and brain scans of urban youth that have been exposed to gun violence who are suffering from PTSD. So in this case, an artist is using this idea of urban violence and gun violence as a metaphor, talking about it as a storm. The object is beautiful as well as ominous. This is a work by the artist Barbara Bloom. Bloom has been consistently drawn to literature as subject matter, and it's most evident in The Weather, a body of work created in 2015 in which the artist made a series of hand-tufted wool carpets with fragments of text written in Braille by well-known authors describing the weather. The carpet in this exhibition uses part of a passage from Cormac McCarthy's novel All the Pretty Horses. The text on here reads, "All the sky to the north had darkened, and the spare terrain they trod had turned into a neuter gray as far as the eye could see. The storm front towered above, and the wind was cool. Shrouded in the black thunderheads, the distant lightning glowed mutely like welding seen through foundry smoke, as if repairs were underway at some flawed place in the iron dark of the world." The artist's use of Braille to visually describe weather emphasizes her interest in the depiction of absence. The weather being recounted cannot be seen by a blind person, and the sighted person can't read the Braille. This is a work by Sarah Bouchard, who is not only a visual artist, but a musician. Besides weather, the other major ephemeral aspect of the atmosphere is sound. Organized sound, music, shares with the weather the ability to influence our moods and emotional life. What Sarah did here was take the weather statistics from New York Central Park for every month of the year 2014 and turn them into musical scores. And what I'm going to play for you now is September 2014. These are 11 paintings from an ongoing series by the artist Byron Kim. The series entitled Sunday Paintings. Every Sunday since 2001, the artist has done a quick study of the sky, wherever he might be. His studio, and Byron lives generally in New York City, in Bushwick, but for instance, this painting was done in La Jolla, California. And he does the quick study, observational study of the sky, and writes with either pen or pencil a quick diaristic entry, journal-like entry on top of the painting, commenting on what's going on in his mind, what's going on in his personal life, what's even going on in terms of politics. For instance, this painting, the text fragment starts out, "It was clear a moment ago, but clouds are coming in from the ocean." Each one of these paintings are very concerned with color. Byron's practice generally focuses on color, and artists, scientists, and philosophers have argued for centuries now what the color of the sky is. And Byron's pursuit of this project, part of it is to kind of think about this issue about what the color of the sky is, and connect himself personally with this changing, very ephemeral phenomena, the weather. This is a work entitled Fly to Mars 2 by the artist Jennifer Steinkamp. Steinkamp is known for her immersive video environments that tap into elemental forces that animate nature. She attended art school and took classes at Caltech in the 1980s and was exposed to the then nascent field of digital animation. She's mentioned science fiction as an influence, but I think her work is more closely aligned with the visionary and utopian. And like this piece, really providing the viewer with an experience that really is almost hallucinatory. Fly to Mars 2, she's created her version of a mythic and timeless tree riding in the wind that really, I think, can only be considered otherworldly. The tree cycles through the seasons in endless succession and is operating in two different clocks. The predictable yearly cycle from spring through winter measured by changes in foliage. And then there's a temporal dance of the tree's branches as if it's being blown around by a wind. These are two works by Brian Nash Gill. The print on the wall is entitled Ash, and the sculpture on the floor, Ash Block. Trees don't just react to weather conditions in the moment, but also act as sensitive historians, recording climate conditions in their yearly growth rings. Gill worked with wood starting as a primary medium in the 1980s, but in 2003 inked the cross-section of the trunk of a tree, pressed a piece of paper against it, and pulled a print. Reducing the idea of a woodblock print to its essence, Gill allowed the wood itself to create the image, distancing the artist's hand from the process. Scientists began keeping accurate records of the weather really only in the late 19th century, and it wasn't until the 1930s that researchers realized that tree rings held a chronology that could push an understanding of climate change back into the distant past. Gill's woodblocks not only act as sensitive historians recording information about fluctuations of the weather, but are literally made out of the carbon vacuumed in the past out of the Earth's atmosphere by the tree. The tree, most of the wood of a tree is composed of carbon taken from the atmosphere. This is a work in Divinity Box by the artist Sean Salstrom. In 2011, when Salstrom was living in Japan, he created this work, and it's a commemoration of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima in 1945. The work is composed of a glass water-filled aquarium. In the aquarium is a glass goblet that Salstrom made. It's in three pieces: the cup of the goblet, the stem, and the base. Threaded through the three pieces is a piece of monofilament fishing line. It goes up to a spool 1,800 feet long, which in turn is tethered to two helium-filled weather balloons. When the piece is performed, Salstrom brings the balloons outside and releases them. They ascend to 1,800 feet, and at that point, the line becomes taut, pulls the goblet up into the middle of the tank, and it becomes whole. It comes together and floats in the middle of the tank as a whole goblet. The heat of the blast of an atomic blast such as Hiroshima fused glass and also created what came to be known as a Pyro-Cumulus cloud, a cloud with its own internal weather, a firestorm. Salstrom's gesture here is really to create an experience which reflects on healing, but also reflects on the fact that a nuclear explosion is, in some sense, a very powerful man-made storm.